A Jewish scholar once declared, "The resurrection of Jesus is true." Wait, what? Yes, you heard that right. A devout, well-respected Jewish theologian publicly stated that the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth actually happened. Why would a Jewish academic, someone steeped in Hebrew scripture and Jewish tradition, defend one of the most central claims of Christianity? What did he see that others missed? What could possibly convince a man like that, trained in both Jewish theology and ancient languages, to accept the resurrection not as myth, but as historical fact? In today's video, we're going to uncover the mind of Pinchas Lapide, an Orthodox Jew, a historian, and a former Israeli diplomat, who made headlines in the theological world by declaring, "Jesus rose from the dead." And no, he didn't convert to Christianity, but his argument for the resurrection is so bold, so unapologetically rational, and so grounded in Jewish thought that it's caused shockwaves on both sides of the religious divide. If you are coming across this channel for the first time, I invite you to subscribe. We reveal biblical truths like you have never seen before. Now let me tell you more about this Jewish scholar. Pinchas Lapide was a Jewish historian, a theologian, and an Israeli diplomat who once represented the State of Israel at the Vatican. That's right, he wasn't sitting in some ivory tower. He was actively engaged in interfaith dialogue at the highest levels, earning the respect of both Jews and Christians around the world. Fluent in both Hebrew and Greek, Lapide had an impressive command of the original biblical languages. He knew the Hebrew Bible inside and out, but what's more surprising, he was also deeply familiar with the New Testament, not to critique it from the outside, but to understand it within the framework of Jewish history and theology. In 1977, he published a groundbreaking book titled The Resurrection of Jesus, A Jewish Perspective. And in it, he wrote something that stunned the academic and religious world alike. "I accept the resurrection of Jesus," Lapide declared, "not as an invention of the community of disciples, but as a historical event." According to Lapide, the resurrection was not a Christian invention, but something that made perfect sense within Jewish thought. He argued that the God of Israel had, on rare occasions, raised the dead, such as in the stories of Elijah and Elisha. So the idea that God could raise Jesus wasn't foreign to Judaism at all. In fact, it was entirely consistent with the character of God as revealed in the Hebrew Bible. In his words, "I cannot rid myself of the impression that some event must have taken place in Jerusalem that left its mark on the disciples." He wasn't swayed by wishful thinking or emotional appeal. He studied the historical accounts, the transformation of the disciples, and the explosive growth of the early church. And he concluded, something real happened. Now you might be wondering, what did this Jewish scholar see that others didn't? Well, he didn't arrive at this conclusion lightly. He approached it like a detective, weighing the evidence with a critical mind and a deep understanding of both Jewish and Christian history. And here are 4 logics that led him there. Number 1, the transformation of the disciples. Lapide pointed out that after Jesus' death, his followers were demoralized, afraid, and scattered. But just days later, these same men were boldly proclaiming his resurrection in the very city where he was executed. What could explain such a drastic change? For Lapide, this wasn't psychological denial. Something real and powerful must have happened, something that turned cowards into courageous witnesses. Number 2, the explosive growth of the early church. From a small, persecuted group in Jerusalem to a movement that spanned continents, the early Christian community grew rapidly. Lapide noted that nothing short of a miracle could explain this. The resurrection wasn't just a footnote, it was the fuel that ignited a revolution. Number 3, the Jewish expectation of resurrection. Here's something most people miss. First-century Jews already believed in the concept of resurrection. It wasn't foreign or heretical. In fact, Pharisees like Paul held to it firmly. So when Jesus' disciples claimed he had risen, it wasn't outside the bounds of Jewish theology. It was a continuation of it. Number 4, the missing body. Lapide famously said, "The resurrection could not have been maintained in Jerusalem for a single day if the emptiness of the tomb had not been established." This is key. The resurrection was first proclaimed in the very city where Jesus was buried. If the tomb still held his body, the authorities could have crushed the movement instantly, but they didn't, because they couldn't. So with these points, Lapide concluded, the resurrection wasn't a myth whispered decades later. It was a public claim, announced immediately, in the very place where it could have been disproven. For Lapide, the evidence was clear. Something miraculous happened in Jerusalem. Now here's where things get fascinating, maybe even uncomfortable, because while most Jewish scholars today reject the resurrection, calling it myth, metaphor, or even Christian propaganda, Pinchas Lapide didn't. And he didn't use Christian logic to get there. He used Jewish categories. See, in traditional Judaism, the resurrection of the dead is not some foreign concept. It's embedded in the Hebrew scriptures, Daniel 12, Isaiah 26, Ezekiel's dry bones. It's also deeply rooted in Jewish prayers and theology, especially among Pharisaic Jews. Lapide simply asked, if resurrection is already part of our belief system, why is it so unthinkable that it happened to Jesus? But this created a kind of theological clash. Christianity says, Jesus rose, therefore he is the Messiah. Judaism says, the Messiah hasn't come yet, Jesus didn't fit the bill. So here comes Lapide, standing in between, saying, I believe Jesus rose from the dead, but I still remain Jewish. And now we have to ask, why would a devout Jewish scholar affirm something his own tradition so strongly rejects? Why side with the event and not the conclusions his Christian counterparts drew from it? It's the apologetic tension no one wants to touch. But here it is, staring us in the face. Because if even one Jewish voice accepts the resurrection as historical, it disrupts the usual narrative. It forces everyone, Christian, skeptic or otherwise, to stop, re-examine and ask, what if it actually happened? So what does this actually mean for Christianity? Let's not mince words. If the resurrection of Jesus really happened, then Christianity stands on unshakable ground. The Apostle Paul put it this way, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is in vain. 1 Corinthians 15 verse 14. That's the line in the sand. The resurrection isn't a bonus feature, it's the cornerstone. No resurrection, no Christianity. Now here's what makes this story so incredible. A Jewish scholar, someone with no reason to support Christian claims, defended the resurrection as a historical fact. Not metaphor, not myth, not mass hysteria. And that forces us to ask a hard question. Could the one thing most challenged about Christianity be the very thing a Jewish theologian found hardest to deny? Think about that. Lapide didn't try to become a Christian. He didn't have a conversion story. But he stared the resurrection in the face and said, yes, that happened. And if it happened, then Christianity isn't built on wishful thinking. It's built on something real, something verifiable, something that even a skeptic, armed with Jewish theology and historical evidence, couldn't bring himself to dismiss. So here's the final challenge. If even a Jewish scholar, rooted in Hebrew scripture, steeped in tradition, could believe Jesus rose from the dead, what's stopping you from at least investigating further? Don't take my word for it. Read Pinchas Lapide's book. Read the Gospels, follow the evidence, and decide for yourself. Because if the resurrection really happened, then nothing could matter more. Have you ever heard of Pinchas Lapide before? What do you think of his bold claim? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And don't forget to subscribe for more eye-opening content like this one. Share this video with a friend, Jewish or Christian, who loves wrestling with the truth. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.